All right, guys, I am Dr. Jackie Parr, also known as the Kibble Queen. And I am so excited to be here this afternoon because I want to take you on a little bit of a journey. It is my journey to becoming the Kibble Queen. And there have been some really big lessons that I've learned along the way, and there are 3 of those lessons that I want to share with you guys here today. But first, I do have to get a little something off my chest. I want you to know that I also really like canned pet food. It's just that Pate Queen does not have the same ring to it. So I'm not here to discriminate, just get that off my chest. And now I need to tell you a little bit about why I needed to start a business in the first place. So it was 2013, and I was on my way back from Boston. I had just finished my residency and my master's, and I was moving back to the motherland. I had also just sold my beat-up old Pontiac Transport minivan to get enough money to pay for the U-Haul. So I made my way back to the motherland being Canada, of course, land of maple syrup and hockey and Tim Hortons coffee. And one of the first phone calls I made when I got back to Canada was to my bank. And I was about to beg for a little bit more money, a few more student loans, because I was about to start a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at the Ontario Veterinary College. So this was to be the final 2 years in a 14-year post-secondary school journey for me. And the first question the bank asked me is, Jackie, have you ever considered filing for bankruptcy? And I'm baffled, I'm shocked. No, I'm not even finished training at this point. And all things considered, I'd been paying the interest on my lines of credit. I was doing pretty well with my American supersized debt. So it became apparent during that conversation I was not going to be getting additional funds for my postdoc. I was going to be living in student housing with no car to save money, but I still needed groceries and I still needed to pay for living expenses. So I started looking into options. And one of the options that came to me was to start a small business. So I set up a small corporation called Parr Nutrition Incorporated, catchy, I know. And my goal was to do homemade diet consulting through that corporation. Now, you may have guessed a stressed out postdoc may not be the prime candidate to own and operate a corporation, and you would have been correct. It wasn't as though I didn't look into other options. At one point, I Googled the going rate for kidneys. I have 2 of them. They both function, so I figured if I sold one, I would be okay. The problem was the going rate for kidneys meant I needed 9 of them to pay off my student debt. This was no longer an option, so we went with the corporation. So lesson number 1 of setting up my own business, if the crown doesn't fit, don't force it. I had an amazing mentor during my residency. In fact, she's still a really great mentor today. She runs a very successful homemade diet consulting company in the US, and she loves it. So it was very natural for me to think of setting up a homemade diet consulting company in Canada. I'm very good at formulating homemade diets for dogs and cats. The problem was I would spend all day in the hospital, long days, and then I would come home at night to spend several more hours doing exactly what I had been doing all day. And it was too much. It really burnt me out. I was this young nutritionist, and I felt like I was trying to wear the crown of one of the most established nutritionists in the world, my mentor, and it was way too big for me. And not only that, my shoulders couldn't support the weight of it. And that was okay. I just needed to realize that that wasn't the crown for me. Now, lesson number 2 was a really hard one for me to learn, and it's not surprising that there were a few more lessons along the way that I needed to learn before I realized I shouldn't be forcing myself into the homemade diet consulting business. So lesson number 2 had to do with money. I knew that I was going to have to recruit customers. I knew nothing about setting up websites. So I paid web.com to set up a website for me because it was cheap. And what I got was a cheap website. One could have easily sold used cars off my website if you had replaced the homemade diet fees with vehicle prices. It was generic, there was a ton of text, it was awful, but it was a really great lesson that cheap often gets you something cheap. So lesson number 2 is you don't have to sell the crown jewels, but know that cheap can be a waste of money. My final lesson came partway through my journey. And so for me, as I'm going through my postdoc, I didn't realize how much the postdoc and the business were stressing me out. I was really only connecting with a certain group of clients. I was recruiting those clients who wanted homemade diets out of weird and wonderful things like organic sprouted lentils. And they had never-ending questions. And I was so tired that I couldn't answer the questions. I couldn't keep them happy. I couldn't keep up with it. I ended up having to fire my first client. It was a client that had been fired by a number of veterinary clinics and then ended up on my doorstep. And I gave it a good try. I really thought I could help. Nothing was going to help this situation. And so the smart thing to do became to part ways, and that was probably the first smart business decision I made as the owner of Parr Nutrition. I then decided I needed a new path, a new throne, so to speak. And that was when I started public speaking, and I loved it. I could help so many veterinary students and so many veterinary team members through my nutrition knowledge when I spoke. So that was my new path, and lesson number 3 was finding my new throne. In 2015, I finished my postdoc, and I have now been successfully adulting for almost 3 years. I have a car, I have an apartment, I have groceries. I even last year purchased mulch. I put mulch in flower beds. That is such an adult thing to do. I loved it. I started realizing through this adulting experience, once I got working a few more reasonable hours, that my public speaking, while I loved it, I was not making a dent in the amount of misinformation on pet nutrition on the internet. And if I wanted to make a dent in that, I needed to go social. And that is when the Kibble Queen was born. My brand is founded in science and facts. I don't promote any products. And my entire goal is to take a positive approach to all the misinformation that's online. I know that I have a very long way to go to handle the information on the internet as the Kibble Queen, but I know that now I'm at least wearing my own crown because it's the only one that really fits. So if you guys have been inspired today, if you have been wearing a crown that doesn't fit you, if you've been sitting on a throne that you just don't feel comfortable on, there are crowns. There are crown jewels. If you're not the person who will wear the crown, just put a jewel on somewhere. And I would encourage you to make your own statement today. Make your own crown. And it's okay if it changes in its uniqueness over time, as long as you always stay really true to yourself. Thank you.